Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this study session. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to this special session, this study session. Before we begin, I'm going to turn it over to the clerk to call roll.
Thank you, Mayor Goethals. Councilmember Pappen. Councilmember Lee. Deputy Mayor Rodriguez.
Here.
Mayor Goethals.
Here.
And Rick Bonilla is not in this meeting. For the record of this item, Councilmember Bonilla will not be attending this meeting because of potential conflict of interest involving his residence. Councilman Bonilla's residence is located in the neighborhood adjacent to the location of the proposed set-out track, and he is recusing himself from council's deliberations on this project because of the potential effect of the council's decision might have on the value of his property.
So welcome, everyone. I want to acknowledge that we've already had many public meetings on this, starting back in April of 2019. I believe there was a community meeting June 11th, several other meetings in October, November, December, focus groups, and community meetings. There are many people who feel passionately about this issue. We understand the passion being expressed and the concerns that have been raised. And we're going to seek tonight to give direction to the location in San Mateo. Before we begin hearing this item, I want to outline the process and the rules that we will be following to allow for respectful discourse. So we ask that all audience members follow our rules of decorum for a council meeting. No clapping, no shouting, no cheering, no jeering. We want no one to feel hindered in expressing their views. So everyone's view is welcome. Please understand that excessive vocalization can have a chilling effect on the public process and other people who may want to express their views. And so that's why tonight I will try to enforce those rules. Let me outline the process that we're going to follow. Please note that this is a special meeting study session that has a hard stop for the City Council's regular meeting at 7 p.m. Because of that, we will be tightly controlling timing of the presentation and speakers with the goal of ensuring that Council has time to deliberate on this issue. If we are unable to get through everything before 7 p.m., this special meeting will be adjourned to finish after the regular meeting. So we're asking for you to help us in getting through this meeting as efficiently as possible. First, staff and Caltrain will provide a brief presentation. Second, council will ask questions to staff and Caltrain. Third, we will open it up for public comment, and I have a few instructions about that. We will have limited time, and there have already been 3 public meetings and 3 focus groups, 6 meetings total on this issue over the last 8 months. The Hayward Park Focus Group has invoked a council rule to provide an organized presentation in lieu of individual speakers from the same group speaking. Under this rule, the group receives a total of 15 minutes, with as many speakers within the 15 minutes as they have arranged in advance. We will cut off speaking at the 15-minute mark. There is a timing clock in the front of the lectern to help you plan your time. Individual speakers will then be called up. Please know that if you have written to us, we have read your letter or your email, even if it was written today. Also, know if your concern has already been expressed, you do not need to say all of your concerns. We encourage you to come up if you have something new to say. Please make sure to submit your yellow speaker card to the city clerk. You can do that now or at any time, but we encourage you to do it before the speakers begin to speak. The city clerk will call up the next 3 speakers, and we ask that you line up along the side over here so that we can move as expeditiously as possible. After closing the public comment period, council will ask additional questions of staff, and then we'll begin discussion amongst ourselves. When all council members have had an opportunity to weigh in, the council will provide direction to Caltrain. If we are unable to complete this process before the scheduled start time of the regular meeting at 7 p.m., we will adjourn this special meeting to continue after the end of the regular city council meeting. We ask you to help us in moving as efficiently as possible through this process. Okay. Welcome to Caltrain and to staff. Casey Fromson, please give us your presentation.
Great, thanks for having us here today, and I'll be sharing it with Brad, and he actually has the first couple slides.
Mayor Goethals and City Council members, thank you for letting us speak tonight on this issue. We have a brief presentation for you. The 25th grade separation project is really a safety project. It reduces local traffic in the 25th Avenue corridor because the gates will not be going down any longer. It was actually number 8 on the Public Utilities Commission Railroad Crossing Safety Priority List. So that is really high on that priority list as far as safety goes. And this will also increase the safety for emergency vehicle access as we open up 28th and 31st, and then there's no gate downtime at 25th Avenue. So it also allows for increased connectivity, east-west connectivity, and will relieve traffic on Hillsdale Boulevard. One other good thing about this, we're going to reduce train horn noise in this area as well, so that's a great thing as well. So as far as project funding goes, the city is responsible for the project funding, which is typical when the city signs a funding agreement with various funding partners. The funding is from the San Mateo County Transportation Authority, the California High-Speed Rail, the California Public Utilities Commission, and the city itself. Now, for the city's funding, it comes from traffic impact fees. This is not a tax paid by residents, unlike some might think. This is actually when a developer comes to develop within the city. They have a project and they have to pay mitigation of traffic that is generated by their project. So the city uses this traffic impact fee to do projects to alleviate traffic impacts made by the development directly or throughout the city from the fundable list. So we've committed $12 million to the grade separation project as it was on the fundable list. Currently, in the traffic impact fee, we're in the negative. And we are estimating that we will return to positive balance based on revenue estimates in the fiscal year 25-26. That is without adding additional current projects or projects over this time period. This is another project that we might be able to fund with traffic impact fees, the 101 Peninsula Interchange project, or various bike and ped improvements. Now, since we don't have necessarily any traffic impact fee dollars, another alternative source would be the general fund. Currently, the general fund unfunded projects exceeds $200 million. And I will say it's probably much higher than that because we haven't entered into that dollar figure, some of the master plans that we have, so some of those projects are not even in that number. Projects like Central Park, I mentioned the 101 interchange, Peninsula Interchange, some of the relief projects that the council has been interested in on Hillsdale Avenue and 19th Avenue and Fashion Island Boulevard. And so there's various projects on that list. Currently, the general fund funds projects. Smooth Streets project is a Measure S project, which could be seen as general fund as well. That's $6 million a year. Road rehabilitation, the council has been very concerned about the road conditions, and so they have been funding $2 million a year for many, many years of general fund money towards that effort. And then the high voltage street light conversion project, which is really reliability of street lights for the neighborhood, but also safety for our city workers. So these council priorities that are currently funded could be halted for a time period if the council decided to fund other projects or needs as they determine. So the 25th grade separation project necessitated existing facility relocations. These photos are of the major PG&E gas transmission line that had to be relocated to facilitate construction of the grade separation project. And the Caltrain parking track is really another one of those existing facilities that must be relocated. As you stated, Mayor, there was communications over the last 8 months. This actually began with earthwork activities that started at the site between 10th and 14th on the Caltrain right-of-way. The next door post that someone had posted generated many inquiries that you all received, and we did as well. We proceeded with a few meetings. October 8th meeting, we had a community meeting where we actually presented 2 viable options that we thought were the ones to bring forward. And we scheduled a study session for October 21st. However, just before that meeting was going to happen, we were advised of new information, discussed that with the city manager, and we felt that it would be prudent to pull back on that meeting and not kind of vet out that new information in front of council and in front of the public, but bring that forward in a more appropriate manner. So one of the things the city manager and I talked about was creating maybe a focus group. We've used this in other issues through the city. And have a smaller group where we can have a conversation around a table and discuss these interests. So the first focus group meeting was with city employees. It was really to gauge the interest of the focus group, whether they would be interested in doing this, and kind of understand some of the issues that they had. Then we followed up with a meeting where we included Caltrain staff, and that meeting was really focused on some of the various designs that the focus group really was concerned about. And thought might work. And then we followed that up. Really, the focus was on operations of the facility, and there were some design discussions as well. So, Caltrain and city staff initially formed a working group to identify and analyze alternatives to the proposed site. Public was also engaged and provided input. And through that, there were 28 options initially considered in what we call the feasibility assessment matrix. With the working group between city and Caltrain staff assessing the feasibility of each of these options. 2 sites were shortlisted for consideration. Those 2 are at the top of this page, number 9 and number 27. And through the community focus group meetings, an additional option was derived, and the 2 options were added for considerations, which is number 4 and number 29. So number 9 is the original Caltrain site. Caltrain has talked about and is willing to put access at 9th Avenue instead of coming through the neighborhood on 10th and 14th. So, and I'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end of the presentation, but the access at 9th Avenue, we did get a concern that there was a safety issue there, but realistically, these vehicles are going to be like pickup trucks and so forth that the workers would just arrive at the site to get on the railroad equipment. And so there's not going to be any congestion, plus it won't be utilized during key traffic hours as well. Actually, some of the Caltrain staff that manages some of the facilities nearby at the crossings actually pulls over in this area now, and so you don't really even notice it. Option 27 was another option just south of the initial option. And what was found out before we had the first public meeting before we were going to do the October 21st meeting was we found there was a preschool in this area that actually has some of their yard within some of the Caltrain right-of-way. This option was determined to be about $500,000 more if we went with this option over the option number 9. Then option 4 and option 29 were vetted as well, and those have significant costs, $13 million for option number 4 and $11 million for option number 29, excuse me. I'll turn it over to Casey.
Great, thanks for having us here again today. So I'm going to recap a few key points of why do we need one. Caltrain has over a dozen parking tracks throughout the 51-mile corridor. Many are close to residential buildings, just as close as the one proposed in San Mateo. These parking tracks are an essential part of maintaining the railroad, and the railroad cannot function without them. And we need to serve our 65,000 riders today, and we have plans to triple our ridership, serving 180,000 in the future. When the 25th Avenue grade separation project became a reality, the parking track needed to be replaced. In the MOU that was signed in 2014, it calls out the scope and budget of the parking track. There was a parking track in San Mateo for 25 years, and we're going to need one in the future. As a reminder, the parking tracks are not used on a daily basis, like the regular main tracks that are there every single day and used. This is going to only be used on a temporary basis. And one additional element that makes the parking track in San Mateo unique, it'll be the only electrified parking track in the middle of the corridor, so it will be primarily used if an electric train breaks down. The new overhead contact system will preclude the use of large equipment and trucks from loading and offloading material at the parking space. On the next slide, we have a visual image to help really illustrate that point. So you could see that there's some residential buildings, then there is currently a road, there's a proposal for a new wall, then there would be a parking track road, and then you can see the parking track. And above that is the electrified infrastructure. And you can see that when we have that in place, you're not able to bring large vehicles or trucks or equipment in there. It's physically not possible because of that infrastructure. So that will make this parking track used even less than our other ones. And then you can see next to that, that's where the main lines are. So again, it's reiterating here, 40-foot trucks would not be able to be going in and out of there. It's not going to be used for heavy equipment. Really, the main use would be if an electric train breaks down, it would slide into that area. So we need to keep it clear most of the time. And these will be brand new electric trains, so we're hoping that they don't break down often. Now, before we go to the next slide, I just wanted to touch on a couple questions that have come up in the last few days and make sure that we answer them now. There's a question of if we could minimize impact to the preschool by just taking part of it. And the answer is no. If option 27 were to move forward, it would significantly impact the preschool, and that is not the preferred location for Caltrain. There's also additional design modifications that can be made.
Sure. I appreciate that some people have brought their children, and children are welcome. We have one council member who's expressed that it's hard to hear the presentation. If it's not a problem, and if it's not causing too much noise, then you're welcome to stay. This should be available in the hallway, so you can watch the whole thing from the hallway if you want to for any time, and a seating area. But I'll just pause at various times if it's difficult to hear. And again, everybody's welcome, and I'll make sure that people with children can speak first if they choose to, and stay for as long as possible. Everyone is welcome. Thank you.
Great. So the second question I want to answer that's come up in the last couple of days is there's been additional design modification suggestions about options 4 and 29, and we have spent hours with the focus group members as well as hours in our own office reviewing different design modifications. We wish there was an easy solution, but there's not, and there's also specific railroad standards and operations that are not commonly understood by the general public. So we've reviewed the latest redesign options that were sent in the last couple of days, and there are several technical issues. I'm not going to go into great detail on them, but we have technical staff here to answer those questions. But at a high level, some of those issues are, one would add an additional track at an at-grade crossing, and that certainly is an additional safety concern there. The state regulator doesn't want more tracks at grade crossings. They would like less tracks and have that separation. Another issue is that one of the redesigns would limit the amount of space for parking tracks because of where the signal would be moved. And then lastly, another one of those redesigns would add additional switches. And it's certainly not a railroad practice to have multiple switches in a row. Additional switches increase maintenance issues as well as the likelihood of derailment. So again, high-level concerns about those additional redesigns we just saw recently. And then the last slide that we have is Caltrain has provided an official response to the city in the form of this letter. It should be made available to the public, and I hope the council has it as well. Caltrain believes it's time to move forward on this issue. We certainly wish that communication with the community started off on a better foot, but we have done our best now over the last 6 months to double down on our efforts for better communication. And we've offered as part of any enhanced efforts to continue that regular communication with the community. Parking tracks exist on our corridor today with no complaints from residents, and we are going to need them in the future to make sure Caltrain is a viable and strong option to support this region.
One more slide. So this is a view looking down 14th Street, the view that exists there today, right from B Street. Through this public process, Caltrain and the city have made adjustments to accommodate residents' concerns. While not an adjustment, but due to the electrification of the facility, the use is more limited, which is not the ideal parking track for Caltrain. Caltrain is willing to access the site from 9th Avenue and eliminate access at 10th and 14th Avenues. This actually eliminates Caltrain roadway traffic that can be there today in the Hayward Park neighborhood, an overall improvement. While not the best use of traffic impact fee funds, a reasonable use, I believe. City staff has increased the recommended funding for enhancements to $1.1 million to fund the block wall to be covered with ivy, which results in additional improvements to the neighborhood as seen by this photo. Again, looking down 14th Street at B Street, much improved view. That's our presentation. We'll take any questions.
Does any member of the council have questions at this point? I have a couple of quick questions. Casey, is there any health risk associated with this parking track?
No.
Is there excess noise created from what will be there different from what is there now?
Today, the railroad is functioning, whether it's Caltrain or freight railroad, 24 hours a day. The parking track would be rarely used. So
when you say freight, you're talking about Union Pacific.
I am.
Will Union Pacific have access to this parking track?
No, it would be Caltrain's.
Will they even be able to use it if it's electrified?
There will be freight on the corridor when we electrify the corridor. They'll be able to run underneath the wires, but they wouldn't be using our tracks like that. So there should be no freight there.
And Union Pacific are the ones who use it in the middle of the night?
Correct.
And so they wouldn't be using this parking track?
Correct.
I just had a clarification. You mentioned the wall would close the current access at 2 locations and make the only access at 9th or 10th?
At 9th Avenue.
9th.
Yes.
Those are all my questions right now. If there's no other questions, do you have a question? Yeah. Sorry.
I just wanted to specifically address again the health impacts. So, are there health impacts related to noise, light, and air pollution that we should be considering?
So there is a railroad that is along the corridor and has been for over 150 years. And so there is nothing additional that will be, contributed as part of this parking track. This is a function of the railroad there. This is nothing like the maintenance facility that we have down in San Jose, where we had to have a whole separate environmental process for it. This is really just a minor function of what is already out there. So there should not be any additional concerns.
Okay. And then also I wanted to ask about the changes of use that were initially described when at the beginning of the notification project, and why has the scope changed? Can you speak to some of the changes in the language, the labeling of the project, and what assurances do we have for the community that there won't be future changes?
Well, I'll start with the terminology we've used. I think we've learned again through this public process that there are many railroad terms that are a little archaic and not easy for the public to understand. So the technical term for this is a set-out track or a siding, and people thought that maybe that was not very user-friendly to the public. So that's why the initial concept was maybe it should be called a maintenance track, not because maintenance occurs there, but because that is a spot where there's temporary equipment that is sometimes placed there to do maintenance along the main railway. We quickly found that people thought that it was going to be a maintenance facility there. And so we once again, just trying in an effort to be as clear about what the use would be, is we started calling it a parking track, because it really is almost like a parking lot that is temporarily used. And as I've mentioned before, this particular parking track would be used even less than the other ones along the corridor. So that is the evolution on the name.
Okay. And the second question about any potential changes in future use?
Yeah, there's absolutely no changes that are planned in the use for this.
Okay. And then my last question is about the cost. If we could just review again why is San Mateo on the hook for this, and why is a do nothing approach infeasible?
So yes, so as I alluded to in the presentation, we are the sponsor for the project. We actually came forward because the city wants the project. So and in doing so, we take, and so we were responsible for getting all the funding. So we were able to get fortunate. We were very fortunate to get high-speed rail funding. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't be here today for this project, because within the county, we just don't have that kind of money to spend on these projects. So we basically, with taking on that as the sponsor, we take on the liability of providing funding, getting the funding together, number one, and then any funding over what we have put together, we would be responsible for obtaining or coming up with ourselves, most likely.
As I mentioned in the beginning, parking tracks are an essential part of Caltrain's ability to maintain the entire railroad for safety reasons and for reasons for us to be able to serve the 65,000 riders we do today, as well as even contemplating being able to have a system that could triple its ridership. And we need to have places where we can be able to safely maintain our system. And so it's not about maintaining the tracks at those parking tracks, but we need these places in order to facilitate that effort on the main tracks. And so there's no future that Caltrain is not going to need these, and they are part of a railroad.
Thank you.
Councilmember Pavan?
I didn't have any, and I do have two questions. Number one is, when activity was first noticed out there, that was some pretty substantial maintenance construction activity, correct? Gravel was being moved. Is that right?
Soil was being distributed there, correct?
In the middle of the night, right? With backup trucks and beeps going on, right?
Yeah.
What is contemplated for this set-out track is not that kind of activity, to be clear.
Absolutely. And what's happening out there today, where there's large poles that are out there today, that's part of the Caltrain electrification project. It's the most massive capital investment Caltrain's ever had, and we do not expect to use that location for those type of purposes in the future.
Okay, so just want to be clear.
Correct.
First got notice of the activity was very loud. The intended activity will not be that kind of activity.
Correct.
Clear, okay. Now I got a question for Brad. Is it that the city's promised 12 million? Does it have the full 12 million?
Well, we have allocated traffic impact fees. As I said earlier, we're in the hole because of this project on that, and so we have not been allocating money for other projects too much. We've done a little bit, but not too much, because we're just trying to catch up. And again, I think I said in year 24, 25, or 25, 26, based on our revenue projections, we'll be back in the positive, and where we can start maybe looking at funding other projects.
Okay, so we're using a substantial amount of those traffic impact fees on grade step at 25.
That's
25.
correct.
Okay. Thank you.
One question. Is it safe to say, Brad, that option number 27 would have been the recommended, the city's recommended solution if the preschool wasn't found to be encroaching on the Caltrain land?
That's what I was prepared to do back in October. Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And was there any, like, what were the main drivers for that, for you saying that was because it would be moving it further away from residential and putting it into a more commercial area?
I guess, you could look at it two different ways. At that location, it actually backs up against some of the buildings that are there, and there are some apartments above some of those structures and so forth. So the right-of-way would be actually right up against some of those buildings. At the current location, as was one of our slides had showed, there is a little bit of a buffer by the railroad, avenue being there, so it's not right up against. But one reason I felt is because there would have to be another environmental process done, so there would be another opportunity for the public to get engaged, right? Because they felt they didn't have the opportunity to in this first place, which I totally understand. The thing that might have changed that as we got into further discussions is my thought process was try to keep the dollar amount down too, right? So I'm trying not to put some of the city's additional impact fee money at risk. So I thought 500,000 would be a number we might be able to fit within the budget that's getting rather close. So that was the other reason I chose that, but that did not include any kind of wall or anything like that there as well, which would have increased that cost.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Madam Clerk, how many speaker slips do we have?
At this point in time, I have 12 in addition to the organized presentation.
Okay. Can I get a show of hands? Do any of those 12 individuals have children with them tonight? Can I ask all the people who want to speak individually who have children with them tonight to line up against this wall? And I'm going to ask those people to go first, and then I'm going to hear the organized presentation. And if you could state your name at the beginning so that the city clerk can pull your speaker slip. How many speaker slips again?
12.
12 in addition to the 15 minutes. I'm going to ask speakers to keep it to 2 minutes so that we can finish this on time and have time for deliberations. So I'd ask for everyone to keep it to 2 minutes. You don't have to use the full 2 minutes. We're here to hear what you have to say. Thank you so much. And with that,
and again, the speaker, there's a timer in front of you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for listening. And I want to say thank you to all the families who've come with their children who will directly be impacted by option 27.
Can you state your
My
name?
name is Bri Myers. I'm a resident of 19th Avenue Park, and I'm also a mom to one of the students at the Universal Colors Preschool. I'm here tonight to fight for the school and voice my opposition to option 27, which would locate the park in back of the preschool and effectively take out the preschool's backyard, which they've been renting from Caltrain since they opened. And as we know, young children need room to run, dirt to dig in, and taking away the backyard could effectively close the school. But option 27 would also hurt the economy of B Street and other businesses that have been renting land from Caltrain and utilizing that for their business. It would also hurt the walkability of the neighborhood by changing the footpaths from the Hayward Park Caltrain station, and it would hurt families in San Mateo with young children. It would immediately hurt the families of 30 people who Universal Colors serves and their 8 employees. But it'll also hurt dozens to hundreds of families who the Universal Colors will serve in the future. There's already a shortage of preschools in San Mateo, and most of those preschools have a waiting list of 2 years. Taking away one preschool makes that shortage even worse. I'd like to share with you a couple of reasons why Universal Colors is so important to the community. It's a Spanish immersion preschool that fits into the neighborhood well, as the locally assigned elementary schools, Sunnybrae and Fiesta Gardens, have a significant population of students who come from Spanish-speaking families. Second, Universal Colors embraces diversity. Every day these kids learn a little bit more about each other, as many of the students at the location of the school come from homes that don't speak English as their primary language. Third, Universal Colors is a neighborhood preschool. One of the reasons my family chose Universal Colors is that we could walk and bike our kids to school and then take Caltrain to work. Lastly, Hayward Park Station has been zoned for transit-oriented development. For transit-oriented development work, residents need amenities nearby. For families, daycare and preschool is one of those amenities. So please do not locate the parking track in option 27. It will negatively affect the neighborhood, businesses, and the families of San Mateo. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next speaker, and I made a mistake already. I misspoke. I was intending to give people 1 minute, but I've already said 2, and we'll try to keep it to as short as possible, but
I'll be
thank
brief.
you so much.
My name's Christy McAllister. I live on 10th Avenue. I also own the school at the corner of 10th and El Camino. And I just want to say, as a resident, I'm really disappointed in the way this was handled, and I want to express that really clearly because it just seems like we didn't find out about this. I know there was notification in the San Jose Mercury News, which I don't know why it was put there or something like that. We didn't find out till dirt's dumped in our backyard, literally. It seems to me that, after all of this, then there was a bunch of community meetings. I went to the one last week and we're listening to all the options. And I just have to say that the premise of all of these meetings was completely faulty from the start. It never should have been a residential option to put this in our backyard. It should have been looking at all of the commercial options. Given that there's such a huge project going on with the grade separation, there should have been an analysis of things that made sense, like the commercial areas to put it in, and costs built into that. What seems to have happened was the whole project was mismanaged from the start. The notification to the community was mismanaged from the start. And now they're trying to backtrack and have all of these community meetings, but they never really intended to change the process or to consider anything. They're comparing everything against the residential option, which is the cheapest option. But honestly, what's happening is you don't have enough money to do this, and you're taking it out of our property value. That's not okay. It shouldn't be an option. Every single option should be, given that the residential option is not viable, what are the possibilities in commercial areas?
Thank you very much. Next speaker. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's specifically what I asked you not to do, and we're not going to do that tonight, or we will cut it. You're fine. We're not clapping. It stifles other speech, and it has a chilling effect on other people who have a different point of view. No clapping. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Stephanie Foster, and I'm here representing as a parent of one of the 30 families that attend the Universe of Colours preschool. I want to thank you for the opportunity for allowing us to speak tonight. My son, Benjamin, he's 3. He has been at Universe of Colours since he was 2 years old. Like most families, my husband and I both work full-time. What I didn't know and didn't learn until I started the process when Benjamin was born of how difficult it was to find childcare and preschool facilities in our local community. I am on 10 waiting lists with Benjamin, 10. I was very fortunate that Terry at Universe of Colours allowed us the opportunity to come off the waiting list and attend Universe of Colours. Otherwise, I'm not sure where I or many of us would be like this today. So I implore you, we do not have enough facilities here in our local community to support childcare and preschools for our kids. I implore you to take the opportunity to put this somewhere else, okay? Do not take another preschool childcare facility away from our community. It's too important. We have this amazing opportunity to enrich our children with a facility like this, a Spanish immersion preschool. You do not find these in our communities that often. It is very, very rare. So that's the key thing that I wanted to point out tonight, on top of everything else that Bree said, that it is so important for our children, for the future of our children and the education of our children to have these types of facilities in our community. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Is there anyone else who's here with children tonight who would like to speak? Please do so. Thank you. Come on forward. Have you filled out a speaker slip? I'm going to ask you to fill one out after you speak. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Kurt Barrett. I'm also one of the 30 parents. And I just, if you don't mind, I just wanted to give the people, all the parents who came with their kids tonight after a long day of work, just to stand up and show who was here from the preschool. So if everyone from Universe of Colours could please stand up. and there's more people out in the hallways. They're just making the point. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you so much, sir.
Okay, thank you.
At this time, I would invite anyone else who has children. If not, then I'll have the organized presentation.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Chris Brousseau, representing the residents in Hayward Park. Thank you very much for your public service and your time on this issue. I know we've met before, and we'll move through this with some speed. So for clarity, there's three big things to remember here. First, our group opposes citing this maintenance area in any residential area. We'll go through that and good news in good time. There are great alternatives. We know there are some problems with them, but they can be solved. The bad news is we're basically back to where we started a year ago, right? A lot of the analysis that's been done, frankly, was not done in good faith, okay? The 28 alternatives contain lots of duplicates. They shouldn't be represented as 28 separate alternatives. Many of those alternatives were discussed in a single 2-hour meeting in October with a small focus group. You can imagine how much time each one got, right? There are most questions provided by the residents asked for in writing, provided in writing, have not been answered. The good news is the city can still fix this. There are viable alternatives. Those alternatives have significant cost reduction opportunities, and I know Caltrain has looked at them briefly just today, but that's an example of the kind of light looking that's been done. These things deserve some serious study, because just looking at them at their face, they're actually quite similar to the structure that the Caltrain has proposed in the current location. There's not a lot of extra switches involved. So one take home is we request that the city and Caltrain defer all decisions until these alternatives are analyzed in good faith. And we'll recap some more. The big takeaway is this is a permanent change to a foundational neighborhood of San Mateo. I'd like to ask Thomas to come up and pick up the next page.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, council members, for your public service. I'm Thomas Butler. I live on 14th Avenue, 100 feet from the proposed project. I'm a public servant too, and I very much appreciate your dedication of your personal time to our community. I've been tasked with presenting our perspective on how we got to where we are today, and unfortunately, that's the bad news story. So I want to kind of whip through it so we can get to the good news story, because there is a good news story. We believe Caltrain and the city did not live up to their obligations to operate transparently. This facility purportedly is an afterthought of the much larger $180 million effort to grade separate 25th, 28th, and 31st Avenues and link the brand new shiny Bay Meadows development with the brand new shiny Hillsdale Mall, right? That's the basic premise there. Great, what does that have to do with Hayward Park? Nothing. It has nothing to do with Hayward Park. We in Hayward Park had precisely no idea that a distant project across a state freeway 2 miles south of our neighborhood would have any impact on our community. Until our neighbors started noticing huge volumes of dirt being imported across our streets and dumped into our backyards, literally in the middle of the night. So after we asked Caltrain, the city, 2 public institutions with transparency requirements, why didn't they notify us of this publicly financed project? Caltrain pointed us to this ad, published 2 years ago on page B5 of the San Jose Mercury News. Is that meaningful notice and opportunity to comment? It's absurd. The affected community in Hayward Park is discrete. It's easily identifiable. It's 10th to 14th in the surrounding community and the other side of the tracks. And so unsurprisingly, not a single member of our community saw the notice in the Merc or knew of the project. Equally unsurprisingly, Caltrain didn't receive a single public comment on the project, not one. What's most surprising is that the city claims it knew nothing about this project. Okay? The city claims it knew nothing about this project, but is simultaneously maintaining that we have the obligation to pay for this project. I'm going to let you guys try to figure that one out, and I'm going to move on. So we asked, how is Hayward Park implicated in the 25th Avenue grade separation project, and why should the city pay for Caltrain's industrial facility? Why should we pay for it to be in our residential neighborhood? After months of being stonewalled, we finally had to issue a Public Records Act request to get the answer to these questions. And what did we get back? A copy of the Memorandum of Understanding that establishes the relationship between Caltrain on the one hand and the city on the other for the 25th Avenue grade separation project. The MOU doesn't create any explicit obligation for the city to fund any maintenance area. The MOU doesn't even mention Hayward Park. It doesn't mention a maintenance area, and it doesn't mention a set-out track. Nowhere in the document. What it does mention is that the city is required to do outreach with stakeholders for the 25th Avenue grade separation project. And it specifically notes that Bay Meadows and Hillsdale Mall are the stakeholders for that project. You know who's not mentioned? Hayward Park, because we have nothing to do with that project, 2 miles away across State Road 92. All right, so we feel that Caltrain's dealings with the community have been disinterested, if not disingenuous. Whoops. After tremendous community outcry and a very helpful letter from you all that you drafted, the city staff, and Caltrain began looking at alternatives that the community had identified, okay? But they didn't look very hard. Instead, Caltrain and the city began an effort to rebrand this facility. So whereas for the first many months of this project, it was referred to as a railroad maintenance area that would be used, and I'm gonna read here, it would be needed 1 to 2 times per week at all hours to store and load heavy equipment for track maintenance and be available for use during capital projects like the 5 grade separations that are coming in the near future to downtown San Mateo and the 25th Avenue grade separation itself. But now we're being told it's merely a parking track or a siding that Caltrain really doesn't need because their brand new electric trains won't break down. I mean, that has inspired a lot of distrust on the part of the community. Nonetheless, in the fall, the city staff asked us to present, if several of us would participate in a focus group. And despite dedicating significant time and resources to look at the alternatives, we never saw any written detailed analysis of any alternatives, ever. Nonetheless, we were hopeful because the focus group did identify at least 2 perfectly viable nearby alternatives in commercial and industrial sites. Right? 5th to 9th and south of 92, north of 25th. Ultimately, Caltrain and the city abruptly ended the process in December, however, and our efforts came to naught because city staff didn't feel comfortable changing the parameters that Caltrain had imposed and the authorized budget that you all had approved many years ago. Okay, there's so many problems with that conclusion on behalf of the city, but I'm just gonna highlight 3. 1, meaningful community input clearly has to come before a project is designed and budgeted. That's axiomatic, right? 2, to compare the cost of alternative sites to an inappropriately set but previously approved budget is defective framing. We just heard that from another community member. And it endorses and furthers Caltrain's failure to meet its public involvement obligations. If originally you had been presented with a $185 million project that was based on meaningful public input and sited in a commercial neighborhood, a commercial industrial area, you would have approved that project. So why are we now anchored on the leftovers of a $180 million project that was inappropriately budgeted? It doesn't make any sense that that's the budget that we have to budget against. 3, it's irresponsible to recommend a site based on costs that have not been properly estimated. And we believe Caltrain has not rigorously sought to find cost-effective designs for alternative sites in commercial industrial neighborhoods. I think we can all agree on that. Even the proposed mitigations for 10th to 14th Avenue are not well thought out. The cost estimate's the same today as it was in the fall, even though the proposed wall is 50% higher. We went from an 8-foot wall to a 12-foot wall, and there's no cost increase. They're talking about building a road from 9th down to 14th, and there's no cost increase. And they're closing off access on 10th and 14th, which is an innovation that came on Friday night. Instead of having 2 gates there, they're proposing to build a masonry wall. No cost increase. I can't trust these numbers, right? And I don't think any of us can. So there's been a lot of discussion of what the community's recourse is in this situation. And I know you guys saw the Daily Journal article. I saw it too, and there was a lawsuit mentioned. I'm a lawyer. I spend a lot of time in litigation, way too much time. I know it's sometimes what's required, and sometimes you got to go that route, but it is frequently wasteful and unproductive. And I am hopeful that we don't have to go that route, because there are two good options. So I'm going to turn to the good news story, and I think we should all focus on that moving forward. Let's leave the bad news story behind. There are two perfectly viable options nearby in commercial industrial areas in San Mateo, right? So we've already emailed you the details of the proposals. I'll just mention for the benefit of our neighbors here in attendance that our focus group has worked hard to provide new high-level designs on Caltrain's costs that substantially reduce projected costs for the 25th Avenue option, which is the best location. No question about it. Make costs for 5th to 9th Avenue very similar to those from 10th to 14th, and allow for construction completion well before the end of 2022, which is Caltrain's parameter. So I'm going to leave it at that, and I'm going to turn it over to Mike Johnson, who's going to give you a little more details about the options that are available to us.
Just for time, I want to mention you're under 5 minutes at this point.
Yep, understood. I'll move quickly. Thank you for your service and the opportunity to speak this evening. So I just want to put a bit of colour to some of the proposals. First of all, the drawings that we produced here, we had to produce our own drawings because at no point during the focal group conversations have the city or Caltrain provided a single piece of drawing information. There were hand sketches on a board, and that's all that we have had. So what I've tried to do is put a representation here of what we believe they are proposing, which is a track right alongside between 10th and 14th with a switch going up towards 9th, we assume. The sound wall that's been proposed would provide no protection for noise for all the people north of 10th Avenue. North of 10th Avenue, nor would it provide anything for the people along Hayward Park. The trains, if you've ever stood in a Caltrain station as a train is pulling out under load, that is what people are going to be hearing in the middle of the night as they're moving maintenance trucks out of the area. So we proposed some areas between 5th and 9th. The idea was to take it away from residence areas. You can see here, 450 feet away from other residents in that area. Now, we understand that there's residents in that location who are opposed to this, and we put a lot of energy into seeing how this could work. Unfortunately, Caltrain did not put the same energy in. The pricing they came up with, 11 million, they came up with no way of reducing those costs. So everything was priced basically as the residents proposed, nothing else. I'm going to push through. So, onto the area which we believe is the correct location for this project. And it's the area that everybody asks about on between 92 and 25th Avenue. It's where the existing tracks are. Tracks are already laid. There's over $1 million to $1.5 million worth of cost in the Hayward Park project, which could be avoided by utilizing the existing tracks. So there were costs put into the original proposal by Caltrain for $1.5 million for a bridge to go over Burrell Creek. Don't go over the creek. We don't need to. There is enough track location before the creek so that can be opened up and the flood mitigation project can go forward as planned. The second is there is access from 19th Avenue. You can get onto this site without going through any residential area with direct access onto the freeway there. Now, the proposal from Caltrain is that it's too expensive to put a switch in that location. What they told us is that the grade separation would not come back to grade until it was under 92, heading into Hayward Park. However, we've spoken to other people who have knowledge of the project, and they say the grades will come together and the merge will be more near Trinta Park. So, again, you would expect them to bring drawings to a conversation about design, and that's what we're looking for, is a meaningful design consultation. Thank you.
Minute and 21 seconds. Let's see if we can make it. Simple story. We don't think you should approve these recommendations. We think you should defer this decision because clearly more homework needs to be done. I realize, sure, there's been a lot of water under the bridge with time, but as you've seen, a lot of that analysis was not meaningful. And a lot of that analysis was engaging the community to try to dampen things down. There's 4 requests we have of you now. First, defer this decision. Secondly, go develop the good faith cost estimates. They're right here. Third, answer all these open questions. And fourth, commit to meaningful public comment. I know this is a tough decision, but this is a huge project. Somehow, all the contingency on a $180 million project's been burned up on other stuff. There's good design alternatives on the table. The public knows Caltrain needs maintenance. The city and Caltrain have commercial areas very close by available to them. That's the end of our presentation. I welcome any questions or follow-up you may have.
Any questions at this time? So I'm going to go to the other public comment at this time. Anyone else who has not spoken, who wants to speak, who turned in a speaker slip and still would like to speak, please line up against this wall. Yes, please.
If I could, is Charlotte Brossard still in the house?
The lady who spoke before me said exactly what I had to say.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
Okay, the first 3
See
speakers.
everyone, see how it's done?
Yeah, very
Thank
nice.
you.
Dominic DeBelize. You're not going to, okay, very good. Kevin Hurl, PhD, followed by Richard Ann, followed by Laura Wood. If you could line up against this wall.
Thank you for your time. Caltrain would like you to believe that we are a group of hysterical NIMBYs and that they are presenting you with the rational options. It is not a rational option to make a decision based on only partial information. The EIR, which they presented on the 25th Avenue project, had no information on the impacts of this project on Hayward Park neighborhood. Rick Bonilla is not sitting there tonight because his property values may be affected by this project. If you multiply that by the number of people who live in Hayward Park, perhaps the costs that Caltrain is saying are too much for them to bear would be how much property taxes the city of San Mateo will be losing from the property losses in this neighborhood. We don't know because no one did the figures. It's been said tonight that there will be no health effects. Studies have shown that noise pollution causes sleep deprivation, cognitive diminishment, hearing loss, and in some cases, coronary insufficiency. None of these costs were part of the examination. Caltrain is asking you to look at one side, which is simply their costs. We in Hayward Park are asking you to look at all the costs and to make sure that you have the proper facts to make a rational decision. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Lori Watanuki, board member of Central Neighborhood Association. Good evening, Mayor Goethals and members of the City Council. We wanted to go on record that the Central Neighborhood is in opposition to a parking track from 5th Avenue to 9th Avenue. There are only 4 options on the table this evening, and we are not operationally or financially viable. This would be at a cost of $11.1 million at the taxpayer's expense, so we do not support the 5th to 9th Avenue option, which is option number 29. As a suggestion, we would like to make sure that the trucks take 101, 92, 82 El Camino Real, the state highways, to the parking track. We're not in favor of the removal and the reconstruction of the railroad track switch to force this into the central neighborhood, at the cost of $11.1 million. This would affect not only the residential neighborhood, but the commercial district as well between 5th and 9th. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Lori. Next speaker. Welcome.
The next speaker I had was Richard Ann, followed by Laura Wood, and then Cindy Sims.
Okay. Okay. He's withdrawing.
Okay.
Next speaker.
He's withdrawing. Laura Wood, followed by Cindy Sims, and then Greg St. Clair.
Well, my name is Laura Wood, and I don't live in the areas of Hayward Park or the central area. I live in Parkside, but I believe in transparency and being really frank and getting the community involved before you put something like this right next door to them. And I have empathy for these people. That's why I showed up. And the other thing is I wanted to find out and ask Caltrain a question. If putting in this parking lot, if that's going to get rid of the Hayward Station.
Thank you very
Is there
much.
plans to close the Hayward Station? Can they
Those
please-
questions can be answered at the end, but we're
Yeah.
not going to have a dialogue
Well,
during your time to speak.
I'm just going to say, if they are planning to close the Hayward Station, there's really no safe access for people that are disabled to get onto Caltrain. My brother has Parkinson's. He takes the bus from my neighborhood. It stops 3 to 4 blocks away by the Hillsdale Mall, which you know on El Camino is extremely dangerous. So instead of me dropping him off at the Hayward Station or him dropping off, going over to Hillsdale, which is so congested, it is really a drawback for me. And I want to state that as just a block in access for disabled people.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Cindy Sims, followed by Greg St. Clair, and then Marina Fitzgerald.
Familiar face.
Yes, hi.
Welcome.
Thanks. Cindy Sims, 117 16th Avenue, San Mateo. I had a prepared statement, but after listening to the Hayward Park group present, I just want to say they did a great job. They are saying exactly what needs to be said, and I hope the council will listen to them and take time, give the time that they've recommended to take a look at the other options available. This is a long time decision for Hayward Park. Seems like we could use the time, the council could use the time to make a thoughtful decision.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Sims.
Next speaker, Greg St. Clair, followed by Marina Fitzgerald, and then Sue Lehman.
Hello, Mr. Mayor and Council. Greg St. Clair from Fiesta Gardens. I'm speaking on my own behalf. This reminds me of what we had in Fiesta Gardens with the sewage tank, that the neighborhood didn't come out until they got the notification, like this neighborhood didn't come out till they heard the trucks, and then they started finding out about it. It was kind of slid under the radar, and it made it feel like you're being bamboozled. So that's why they're in the uproar. Going and listening to this, it shows that it's not transparent. And I would think that we need to stop and just take a backup before any decision. One of the issues at the last meeting we had here, one of the Caltrans representative, when it said, why aren't we just going for viable in a commercial zone? His response was basically, well, if you bought by the railroad tracks, what do you expect? Which incited everybody. And it was like, it started an uproar. Then, you know, another Caltrans said, okay, time out, let's back up here, let's talk differently. And I feel that the neighborhood feels that distrust. We're citizens of our town protecting our town. If this many people come out to a meeting, they're saying uproar, there has to be something that says we need to put the brakes on and make a decision after we have a lot more outreach. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg.
Next speaker is Sue Lehman, followed by Albert O., and then Drew. And again, if you could line up against the wall so we can move efficiently. Sue Lehman, Albert O., and then Drew.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having us here and for the opportunity to...
Ms. Lehman, would you pull the microphone down? Thank you so much.
There you go. Better?
Sorry. I can't remember what your name is, but
Susan.
thank you. Welcome, Susie.
Thank you. I've been a Hayward Park resident for over a decade, and I initially considered this area because of its quality of life and conveniences to living one's life. proximity to charming restaurants, coffee shops, grocery stores, and entertainment, as well as transportation. And I value its cultural diversity. When I heard about the maintenance area, I was appalled, frankly appalled. And I thank these guys for putting together a great presentation because it expresses exactly this way I feel. How could the city let the quality of life deteriorate for the very residents in this area? I'm very disappointed. I want to stay in Hayward Park. I had the dream that I would retire here, but I can't, and I won't put up with a declining quality of life and rising assessments in the face of a declining market property values should the maintenance area be developed. This project jeopardizes this dream, and I urge the City Council, please don't let us down. Delay the decision to develop the maintenance area. Fully assess other options. My hope is that I can stay here, and certainly there is a win-win solution somewhere here. Thank you.
Next speaker is Albert O., followed by Drew, and then Rebecca Smith.
Council members, thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Albert O. I'm a homeowner and resident of Hayward Park. My wife and I, we moved to Hayward Park in 2016 to start our family. And about a month after we purchased our home, our first daughter was born. 3 years later, our second daughter has been born. And they are now children of this community. And they deserve an opportunity to grow up surrounded by community and not next to an industrial facility. As you're plainly aware, the residents of Hayward Park have voiced their consistent opposition to building this parking track in our or any residential area. It is inherently an industrial facility that belongs in a commercial area. The families here are the front line who will be forced to endure round-the-clock disruption of loud maintenance work, and our children are going to be the ones who are forced to grow up around literally a perpetual construction site. And I'd say most frustratingly, more suitable commercial options exist, but we've been told by the city and by Caltrain that, who don't reside in this neighborhood, that these options are not economically viable. So I urge you as our city council representatives, please put families first and oppose building this blight in our community. Thank you.
Next speaker is Drew, followed by Rebecca Smith.
Good evening. So I've gone to a lot of these meetings, and one thing I can't get out of that I struggle with that's not been brought up is how this whole thing fits into the Caltrain business plan and grade stepping through downtown. I feel like in 10 to 20 years, we're going to be back here discussing this whole thing over again because there's 4-track passing sidings, potentially Hayward Park South to Belmont, and grade step will need shoe fly tracks and stuff in different ways to get through there in the elevation, which means whatever proposal's even been done so far is going to get ripped out, and we're going to have to redo this whole thing over again. And I've been on this for a while, we need a plan in San Mateo around Caltrain and just how it interfaces with the city and the whole way from the south to the north. And this is a perfect example of this. We're gonna do something and then we're gonna have to redo it again. And all the data is there. There's been a business plan approved and stuff for this and grade step. We want grade step through downtown. Second, on funding, I'm struggling with this. There's zero funding. South San Francisco got $11 million from the TA for their station project beyond their original budget. They went to the TA and the TA approved it. So I don't know why San Mateo is a city that can't get any money. We didn't get it for the sound wall on 101 to raise it up a little bit. So we just seem to keep having to take the hit. And without even going back to the TA and say, hey, we need to look at other options. There are some technical options that cost more money. I don't know if they pan out or not and stuff. And furthermore, in the paper, it talked about closing Atherton, which is going to be $10 million or something. It will ultimately save. Somehow there's money to do this and stuff when we've been told there's no money and stuff from Caltrain. So that's my time's up. Thank you.
And the last speaker I have right now is Rebecca Smith.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Smith, and I'm a 20-year resident of Hayward Park. My neighbors talked about this deeply flawed process, and I really appreciate their presentation. But I want to emphasize 3 points. First, the misrepresentation that has happened over and over again, and I would argue occurred in this room tonight. Casey mentioned that the project would not be used for maintenance. But yet in the meetings, when we would ask the same question, the description would shift. And she and others from Caltrain, I don't want to vilify her, would say it's not going to be used for maintenance, but it will be used for staging. And we will have to roll things out to take care of things on tracks. If we're doing grade separations in other areas, that suggests that it's going to be used for staging in those other areas. Moreover, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Anyway, I'm very concerned about the misrepresentation and the complete breakdown of trust. The explanations for why this facility needs to be in San Mateo at all, I would argue, are deeply specious. They're inconsistent with the fact that the site will only be being used for disabled trains, because there it seems that they could easily electrify the parking track in Burlingame and that wouldn't be an issue. Moreover, Caltrain's math, in addition to in the budget, doesn't add up for the reason for why the distance is so critical for these tracks being close together, these sidings. And they haven't had a site in San Mateo for 2.5 years, and Caltrain is running. Lastly, I want to say that with Caltrain's negligence in this process and their lack of adherence to the law requiring public input has resulted in improper budgeting, and they're trying to put San Mateo on the hook for that. And now they're asking you to rubber stamp their incompetence at the expense of the long-term quality of life of your constituents. And I'm asking you to think about, who do you represent here, your constituents or Caltrain? Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, at this time, I have no other speaker slips.
Thank you very much. I will close the public comment period, bring it back to the council, and unless there's an objection, I'm going to turn it over to staff, Casey and Brad, to answer some of the questions that we received. Were there questions that you heard that you want to answer, or do you want me to bring up specific issues?
I'd like to answer one question very clearly. We have no plans to close Hayward Station.
Okay.
And then besides that, I would defer to you for which ones you would like some clarifying answers.
Diane, would you like to start? Okay.
I'd first like to hear more about your analysis of I guess I call it the 4B north of Creek option. I've met with the residents groups and I've looked at that, and quite frankly, what I've seen from Caltrain doesn't explain very thoroughly why that would not work.
Are you referring to options on this slide or the most recent proposals that were sent in from the community?
The most recent proposals that were sent. So it would have been the option that would have been located just north of the creek, so it wouldn't cross the creek. It'd be
So a variation on option 4, is that correct?
Yeah. Yes, that's what it looks like.
So if you would like the technical answer, I'm going to ask Raphael to come up and talk about that, and then I'll do my best to try and jump in when I feel like maybe he's getting too technical. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Raphael Bolin, I'm the project manager for Caltrain. So you're asking specifically about the option that was brought up recently of the modified version of South on 92?
The recommended option that the residents has put it forward.
Yeah, I think they had two, but if you wanted this one in particular. So this option is south of 92, and it's essentially saying, why don't we keep one of the existing tracks that's there? And at first look, I think that has an appeal to it, right? Because there's already a track there. We're building a grade step to the west. Why can't we just keep one of them? So we did work with the focus group quite a lot. In fact, we spent one session just talking about this one. So I'll try to hit the highlights without going into too much, what did you say, technical detail? So the grade step we're building is off to the west side. And it ends, the physical structure ends roughly where the baseball diamond is. There. And then the tracks come and conform back to where Hayward Park is. So the end of the construction is right there. So the last bit of the grade SAP, the new tracks are where the existing tracks are, if that makes sense. So the first problem with it is the new tracks are the old tracks in that location. So then the next issue is, okay, you need to take a turnout, which is just a thing that lets you go from one track to a new track somewhere in this area and bring it off to the side. So this new alternative that we saw yesterday, it kind of gets the idea by looking at South San Francisco where you have a crossover, but that's not what that's a different piece of equipment. So they've used a different piece of equipment, which is a thing that you use to cross from one track to another. This is a turnout, and they do have set angles. And so there's not an infinite number. I'm sorry, this is a really small drawing to be doing this on, but essentially there's only one angle in which a set out track, a switch comes off a main line, okay? And so what it would mean in layman's terms is that you'd end up overshooting where you need to tie back into that track. And so they would end up with a curve that would go up and over, and that's why there's a significant cost here for essentially undergrounding the existing canal that's there. The reason you have to build a bridge over Beresford Creek, and that's regardless of whether or not the parking track goes that far, because the road access would have to be off 25th no matter what. I know there was an arrow showing it coming over here, but there's no room to put a road and a track and that canal. It just doesn't fit. So you would still have to build that bridge, and it has to be a legitimate bridge because this is in a flood area, and part of what this project does is it takes these houses out of the FEMA flood zone, and it does that by effectively passing it through the wall. If you don't have a comparably heighted bridge on that side, then you've just rebuilt a dam and you make it a flood zone again. So we can't do that. We're trying to clear the flood zone, not create it. And so then there's a lot of other issues with this issue. That's the biggest one. One that I've glossed over conveniently is you can only have a switch on a straight piece of track. So we'd have to somehow realign our mainline alignment because there isn't enough straight track there. So that's kind of a TBD. I didn't want to throw it out because we were brainstorming trying to get to a solution. So you take the small ones and set them aside. But that's kind of a big one, right? Because you'd have to realign your mainline tracks. And we did sign an agreement as part of that same funding agreement with High Speed Rail saying that we would maintain a 110 mile an hour alignment in these curves. So we'd have to look at that. There's also the little matter of the fact that this is electrified, so we'd have to move those poles. And then there's the whole issue of there's some environmental mitigation areas that we are currently using to treat water in situ before it goes into Bay Meadows and or use it to offset some of our environmental. And that we'd have to find a new home for that. So those are all things we'd have to solve. I don't think they're unsolvable. The issue there is it's just really not viable when you look at the real impacts, when you put in real track geometry. It's appealing to assume you could just connect the dots like that, but that's not how tracks work. So that's the issues with that. I could discuss this one if you like as well, or.
Sir, Public comment is closed at this time, sir. I appreciate that.
So 5th to 9th was another one this actually came out of this community focus group that we had. So immediately you look at 5th to 9th and it looks very appealing because it's more commercial, less residential. Of course, there unfortunately is a universal crossover at 5th and 9th. We call it CP POM. CP just meaning control point. So that is a thing that lets you cross from one track to the other and then from the other track back again. These are very important on the railroads, and you can't have things take place in the control point because from a signaling point of view, not so much now the switch itself, but the signals that go with it, it just doesn't work with our train control system. So the version that we saw yesterday, or I saw yesterday, was take the track and start it across the road, cross 9th, and have this as the usable space. So again, there's smaller things, I'll gloss over those, but the big issues with that are, one, as Casey mentioned, PUC, which is the California PUC is the regulatory authority for grade crossings, and we would just make this from a 2 to a 3 track crossing, which would make it less safe, and we would have a very, very hard time getting PUC to approve that because their mandate is to improve safety at crossings, not to make it worse. The other issue is gates, the way that gates come down. So gates have to be down a minimum of 22 seconds before a train comes for safety reasons. It takes about 2 seconds to go bling, bling, bling and drop. And then it takes, depending on the length of the crossing, somewhere from 4 to 7 seconds to clear the crossing. So you sum that up, you're about 27, 30 seconds, something in that vicinity. You have to warn that a train's coming to drop those gates. So 30 seconds in time times a known speed equals a distance, right? So in this case, even at 15 miles an hour, you're talking about 650 plus feet. So the shunts, which are the things that tell the gates to drop, would be here. You'd end up with like a 275-foot long usable space. Or your train would drop the gates the entire time it was there, and 9th Avenue would be effectively closed. So, like I said, there are other issues with this, but the most obvious one that comes to mind is, Caltrain standards require 900 feet operating. This would give us less than a third of that because we can't use space on the other side of a shunt. And if the second you touch that shunt, the train doesn't know that you're not going to cross the crossing. As soon as it's not that smart a piece of equipment. As soon as you hit it, boom, those gates go down, and they will stay down until something clears it. I hope that helps.
Okay, thank you. And then I had one last question for city staff. Have we approached the TA at all to ask them for additional funds?
Yeah, I had a conversation with the TA rep that I deal with there, and basically he had said that that would be a heavy lift for the board to approve something like that, and that the county sales tax measure has a certain amount of money for grade separation projects, and they're oversubscribed for those projects at this point in time, even with any issue of San Mateo considering any more grade separations. So again, his feeling was a very heavy lift for the board to consider and approve something like that.
Okay, that's all the questions I have.
Thank you. Any other questions from other council members?
I had a question about property values. Is there any data to support the concerns from the residents that this will negatively affect property values?
We have no information to suggest that. Again, a railroad functions 24 hours a day if you consider Union Pacific running in the middle of the night. And so that's where the vast majority of the activity is happening already in back of anyone's residence or business that happens along the railroad. These set-out tracks are nothing compared to that regular activity, and certainly nothing compared to what the maintenance facility that we do have, which is a 20-acre one in San Jose.
Can I follow up on that? So we heard from 3 different groups of people talking about not wanting it in the area that it's proposed, not wanting it where the current daycare center is, and not wanting it in the central neighborhood between 5th and 9th. It seems to me the daycare facility is the closest that anybody is to the train. They're right on the tracks in your right-of-way. Is that correct?
They're not on the tracks. We certainly couldn't have that. But yes, they have some of their property is located within the Caltrain right-of-way, and we have businesses up and down the corridor that have that, and we enter into leases to make sure that there's a process in place.
Is it unsafe for the children to be playing in that backyard for the child care center?
No, I don't believe so. I think that from what I've seen that there's a fence and a barrier, and certainly, a way so that someone's not walking directly onto the tracks, and Caltrain has a program to make sure we have fencing along the entire corridor to limit that access.
And earlier, I believe you said, and is this true, that there's no additional noise? I appreciate that it's a huge burden, and we've talked about this many times. It's a huge burden to have the train tracks close to your property. It is loud at all times of the day. It's inconvenient for any number of reasons. Union Pacific is going in the middle of the night all night long, and the train horns are crazy, and that's a problem that we as a council are trying to solve and spending millions of dollars to try to solve. But this project, does it increase the train horn noise? Does it increase
No, it does not increase
any of the
train
impacts
noise.
to this neighborhood?
Does not impact additional train noise that would be occurring there. Its really primary purpose would be to not have anything there, to not be any activity. If a train were to break down, that would be a key spot where it could be placed for a temporary period of time to get that back into service as quickly as possible, because that's what we'd be wanting to do, is serving, the thousands of people every day that we have there.
Thank you. Do you have the pictures that you presented at the last neighborhood meeting, the most recent one in January?
Yes, we do have some of those. I think the pictures you're referring to are the pictures we had about our maintenance facility, which is in San Jose, which is right here. This is an example of this. So we have one maintenance facility for the entire 51 miles of Caltrain. It's located in San Jose. If you go to the next slide, you can see from an aerial view there, it's 20 acres. It has people coming and going 24 hours a day, approximately 100 department employees there, 120 crew members, and this is where we do all of the work on the train. So even if it was parked, we would want to be getting it down here to do actual real maintenance work on it.
And that's what many of us pictured, and I think many of the people who are in the audience pictured. It's what I pictured. I'll speak for myself. That's in no way what you're trying to build here.
That's correct. And then the next slides that we have here, more pictures of the CMOS facility that we have. And then these pictures are existing parking tracks that we have along the corridor. We also did a time-lapse video because we really did understand that a lot of people maybe can't envision what these parking tracks would look like, but this is an example of ones up and down the corridor. You can see residential and commercial areas by them. There's a school next to them. At the request of the community, we've listed them and put them on our website. So hopefully nobody went onto the tracks, because that would be very unsafe. But we are trying to be transparent and answer questions to the best of our ability. There's a couple more slides, again, of parking tracks that exist on the corridor today and have been there for some time.
No further public comment at this time. Are there any other questions by the council? If not, now is the time to give direction, and our meeting starts in 2 minutes.
I just have one other question about these alternative proposals being vetted. Do you believe that the engineering and financial feasibility study of all of the alternatives was up to a professional standard and that you acted in good faith?
Absolutely.
Do you believe that, Brad? Brad, is that your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I was involved in the group that met and vetted the 28 options. Obviously, I'm not a train engineer, but when you want to do design work on a train track, you hire someone that's familiar with that, and that's what Raphael is. I do understand construction and civil engineering, so I'm able to pick up on it pretty well. As far as the costs go, when you're at this level with virtually 5% design effort, you make high-level estimates. That's what was done when we came up with the $180 million for the grade separation in the first place. We didn't have the detailed design to come up with that cost estimate in the budget. So guess what? We're going to be about on that number as $180 million. Another example of that would be the wastewater treatment plant. We're going to hit that target pretty much right on. So these are professional people that make those estimates and do this day in and day out. So I'm very confident about that.
So we just have a minute, but I've listened to everything and I've listened to your opinions. I appreciate all that's gone into this. I haven't heard anything that creates a health risk. I haven't heard anything that that makes the other options that we have looked at viable. I heard Raphael's discussion of what makes all these others very difficult. I do think it's worth asking the TA for money, and if the council would like to see if the TA would give us more money to see whether the other options would be financially viable, I will do that. We can draft that letter and send it from the city. And again, I appreciate that the neighborhood feels like it's a burden to be close to the train, and I've talked to many members of the community who do have trouble with the train noise and trouble sleeping at night. I don't feel that this project increases that noise, and I do think that we should mitigate the impact of this neighborhood with the wall. I read many emails from members of this neighborhood talking about how the wall not only should be built but should not have access into the neighborhood. The only access should be from 9th, that it should absolutely have vegetation on it, some kind of ivy, and that those things would help to mitigate this for the neighborhood. So I see that could be the only option that we're left with, but I would like for everyone involved to take that last step of seeking additional funds from the TA. I'm willing to do that. Is there anyone else who wants to state an opinion at this time?
Additional money from the TA for?
For an additional viable option, which the only other viable options that I see is number 27. And that would take away the daycare. And we heard from 30 families tonight that they would be severely impacted by not having their daycare center there.
So there's a couple things.
So I just have my comments. I just want to make sure I don't run out of time.
I had a couple things, Mr. Mayor. Number one, it seems like we got some drawings yesterday that were cursorily looked at. So I'd at least like to take a look at those. And if it is still, as Raphael suggested, you ain't going to be able to do this on a train track, I get it. So, but I would like to take a look at this. I'm certainly not adverse to asking more money from the TA. And if that's possible, fine. If it's not, Brad, I understand it's a heavy lift, but I kind of feel like there's no harm in asking. If it ain't going to happen, it better be the Taj Mahal. I really feel that. And that's kind of where I am at this moment in time. I don't, you know.
My concern with this approach is that we're going to say, hey, TA, can we have some more money? And they say no. I have reservations about moving forward with the staff's recommended plan. I mean, I feel, even though we started this in April, I still feel that this is rushed, and I still feel that the pressure to make a quick decision. And a lot of it, I feel the reason that is because of although I want to recognize how Caltrain has been communicating with council recently, I think that if they would have started this earlier and had a thorough environmental review process where we were meeting with residents and we were getting staff involved, I think we would have probably been able to come up with some better options. I feel for the residents of Hayward Park and nearby neighborhoods, and I understand their lack of trust in this process. I mean, we saw the presentation, we saw how, that first meeting, I was at all the meetings that we've had. And that first meeting, a member of Caltrain even admitted that he wouldn't want this in his backyard if it was in his backyard. And I know that that might have been just off the cuff remark, but I think that that's where this distrust comes from. I feel for how the name has changed 3 times of this project, and it's really left us in a situation where we're just trying to choose between the very least, the worst, among the worst options we have, and we don't really have any good options. And so I am against the staff's recommendation of locating it between 10th and 14th. I just do not think that's the right location. I have other ideas on where we might be able to put this. I agree with the mayor that really the only other alternative is the option 27. I was really surprised to learn that a preschool would have their play area on the Caltrain's right away. And I confirmed with Caltrain today that they are not leasing that land. It's just kind of like they just moved their boundary out behind it. And I don't think it was the preschool's fault. It was the owner of the preschool, the owner of the building. And I really think that, we're talking about $1.1 million for a wall. There has to be something I think we can do with that money that might be trying to help the preschool perhaps move to a more appropriate location that's not illegally encroaching on the Caltrain right away. My son went to a Spanish immersion preschool here in San Mateo. I'm a big fan of those schools. It was called Welcome Amigos. It's still around. It's on Alameda. And the last thing that I would want to do is force a school to move. But I'm looking at all the options, and that to me seems like the most realistic thing that we should be looking into. And at the very least, that option, which the staff would have recommended, if the preschool is not there, it will trigger a new environmental review, the one I think the San Mateo residents deserve. So that's kind of my thoughts on that.
So at this time, I'm going to continue this meeting to the end of our regularly scheduled meeting. We have to start our regularly scheduled meeting at this time because it was scheduled for this time. So we will reconvene this issue. There's no consensus at this time, so we'll have to talk this out at the end of our regularly scheduled meeting. So it is continued. We will start our regularly scheduled meeting in just 4 minutes.